Our father had left very faint footprints through his life that we had to chase.
He would be astonished at what we've managed to discover about him.
John and Sheriff Probert barely knew their father Jack. They were toddlers when he enlisted in the army in World War II, and he never came back. Their mother spoke little of him, and for half a century Jack Probert remained a mystery to his own sons, barely a shadow in the back of their minds.
Vaguely remember him running across an open paddock to catch a train that was just moving slowly out of the station.
But their curiosity was reawakened by a bundle of letters stashed in a garden shed since their mother's death nearly 30 years ago.
I discovered a letter in it, amongst all the condolence letters, that was written from a Roderick Wells. And as I read it, I realised that he had actually known our father.
Rod Wells had been a wartime mate of Jack's and survived Sandakan, the infamous prisoner of war camp on Borneo. Against the odds, he was still alive, and the story he told set the brothers on a personal odyssey of discovery.
We then proceeded to find out as much as we could about Sandakan. As soon as we found out about Sandakan, then it just naturally pushed us back stage by stage through his life.
So it was that half a century after their father's death, Sheriff and John began piecing together the fragments of his life, discovering their father had been married before and a possible half-brother they still can't confirm. Even the shock that he'd been twice jailed for petty crimes.
He then appeared before the Beak at one stage and was then committed for a year to perhaps one of the more infamous New South Wales prisons, namely Goulburn at that time.
But it's Jack's war exploits that give him a rare place in Australian history. He's one of only 2 soldiers confirmed to have been prisoners of war twice. The first time as a rifleman at Dobritz in Germany in 1914. His escape 3 years later earned him the Military Cross.
He found out that his father was dying in Bethesda Hospital, and within 2 days he escaped from the prisoner of war camp 170 kilometres across Germany, out through the port of Stettin, amazingly in the coal hold of a Swedish ship.
But even married life back home after the war couldn't settle Jack. At 46, he faked his age to enlist in World War II, but he was mysteriously discharged.
We have reason to believe that he was discovered as having told little porkies on his age, because at that stage he was 46, and I think he passed himself off as 35.
The larrikin was undeterred. 6 weeks later, he signed up again and was posted to Singapore, this time changing his age and his name to Jack Moole Probert.
This story is a very Australian story, and people, I think, will identify tremendously with Jack Probert because he's so quintessentially Australian.
Historian Lynette Silver had already stumbled on Jack's trail while researching a book on Sandakan. She'd been struck by his audacity in the face of capture by the Japanese after the fall of Singapore.
He had stolen the post office clock from a little place called Bukit Timah, which is on Singapore Island, and even though they were crowded cheek by jowl in the bowels of this ship going to Sandakan with their knees up under their chin, he had managed to get that clock on board in his kit bag.
But all the cheek in the world was no match for the Japanese. Sandakan, like other Japanese prisoner of war camps, was a brutal hellhole for 1,800 Australians.
They just simply faded away. The Japanese weren't feeding them. They were down to about 70 grams of rice a day, eating slugs and grasshoppers and anything else they could come across, and they just went.
Only 6 Australians survived Sandakan. Jack died just 3 months before peace was declared.
It was almost as if it was another person. Of course, I realised it was my father, but it probably didn't have quite the impact then as it might have had if I was a lot older.
Jack Probert's story leaves a tantalising question in history. How rare was he? How many other Australians were also prisoners of 2 wars?
There would be some, but no one actually knows. So it's really good that we found Jack Probert, and we can add to his number, of course, the other fellow that turned up the other day.
It's been an extraordinarily eventful journey, and we've discovered things that I'm sure that he would have wanted committed to the dustbin of history.